Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining our panel discussion on Agile leadership. My name is Kylie. I'm the US Outreach Specialist here at Factorial HR. I'm delighted to be here today with Akua, Nyame-Mensah, and Meenakshi Iyer. We'll be discussing what Agile leadership looks like, how you can become more agile, and what leadership shifts we'll be seeing in the future. Overall, we'll be answering the question, how can we navigate through the roadblocks to success and become better, more agile leaders? So here's a bit about our panelist. Akua is a certified executive and leadership coach, recognized facilitator, speaker, and host of the Open Door Conversations podcast. She helps entrepreneurial-minded leaders clarify what they should focus their time and energy each day so they can go from reactive to proactive. As a former startup executive, she launched an online platform for the first African-based technology unicorn, Jumia Group. Currently based in Ghana, Akua has lived and worked in the US, Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and South Africa, and has traveled to over 30 countries across the world, which is very impressive. On to our next panelist. Meenakshi thrives at the intersection of people, process, and technology. She's a T-shaped servant leader and community builder with a nonlinear interdisciplinary career in IT, Agile/business process transformation, international healthcare, HR, and training in both India and the USA. Stop, breathe, think, act is her motto. An ICF certified personal agility and self-leadership coach, Meenakshi partners with mid-career technology leaders in shaping their people and change leadership journeys. She is fluent in 4 languages and has lived and worked in over 10 cities throughout India and the US. So as you can see, our 2 panelists are amazing leaders with a lot of background. So we're going to have a lot of good input today. This session is interactive and we encourage your participation. If you have any questions for either Akua or Meenakshi throughout the panel, please share in the chat and we will address all those questions in the Q&A session following. If you have to leave early or miss a bit of the discussion, don't worry, it's being recorded and we will share it with the attendees later this week. If at any time you have a doubt or need clarification, you can also share that in the chat as well. And before we hear from our experts, here's a bit about Factorial. We are an all-in-one provider of software solutions for people teams. Our software features time and attendance tracking, applicant tracking, performance reviews, and more. We streamline HR processes, giving HR professionals more time to dedicate to what really matters, their employees. So Meenakshi and Akua, thanks so much for being with us today. How are you doing?
Doing well, thank you. And it's lovely to be here with you, Kylie and Akua. I think it's a true representation of what you're going to talk about, given how we connected and how we are logging in from different parts of the world, similar to the attendees. Such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, exactly. It's really nice to see people from all over connecting and joining today. And Akua, how are you doing today?
I'm doing really well. It's about 4 p.m. where I am, so my day is wrapping up, and I'm super excited to have the opportunity to connect with you both. And yeah, I look forward to also hearing from the attendees as well. So thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. I'm really happy to have you guys here today. And so let's see. Let's get into it. So in this panel, we'll start off with a question for both panelists. Following that, each panelist will receive their own questions and be able to expand or add on what each other have to say. You are both encouraged to ask each other questions if you have any curiosity from the other's response. So let's get started. In your own words, and as I said, this is for both of you, in your own words, what is Agile leadership and how does it differ from other traditional leadership styles? So Meenakshi, you want to go first?
Yes, certainly. To me, so when I look down, I'm looking down because I've made some notes so that I make sure I cover everything that I wanted to share. So to me, Agile leadership is really, I would say, 2 or 3 things. One is it's about valuing progress over perfection. It's leading with empathy, curiosity, and respect. And it's really knowing how to dance And what I mean by that is knowing when to lead and when to follow. And I would like to get into it a little bit more later on in the conversation. But to me, that's what Agile leadership is all about. So it's really about the ability to respond, not react, the ability to ask, not assume, and iterate, because the alternative is you'll stagnate. And I think that the difference, the other part of the question is how different it is from traditional leadership styles. I think that a lot of times traditional leadership styles, the way we have known it, first of all, most of them have evolved or they're rooted in the industrial age. And I think that there's a lot of opportunity for us to shift, that we are no longer managing people working in factories, but large part of the time we're working with knowledge workers where needs are different. So I think that in comparison to Agile leadership, I find traditional leadership to be sort of, it can be siloed and it can be static in some ways. And the expectation of knowledge and wisdom and inspiration is sort of unidirectional in a traditional leadership setup. So that's my view.
Thanks, Meenakshi. Such a great answer. Thanks so much. And Akua, what about you? What do you think? Do you want me to repeat the question or?
No, I think I have the question. And I mean, I hope everyone saw that I was nodding my head a lot. I really loved, Meenakshi, what you've shared. And from my perspective, it's just that. The fact that we can evolve, we can shift, the fact that, it's flexible, right? There are different ways in which you can show up. And so what comes up for me when I do think about Agile, I think of newer sort of descriptions of leadership, such as situational leadership or context-based leadership. And I think that this concept of Agile, which came from more of a, correct me if I'm wrong, because I think you know more about this than I do, Meenakshi, but it comes from more of a software sort of background, can really translate well to other types of departments and other types of teams, because it's not about top down, but really just recognizing that ideas can really come from anywhere. And that in order for us to move forward in the world that we're now creating, it becomes even more important for us to be transparent to some extent, communicate in different directions, and really just recognize that power just doesn't come from the top, right? We've seen so many things shift where employees have a lot more power now in terms of the opportunities that come their way, just because of how we communicate and how the internet has really shifted it. So Agile leadership, from my perspective, is all about really going from, and this is so funny because when I think about even what I do with my clients, but really going from being reactive to being very proactive at the end of the day. Yep. Really just recognizing that we can put some structures in place, but we also need to leave space for creativity. And we need to make sure that we're incorporating everyone into our decision-making.
Great. Thanks both of you. Meenakshi, I loved what you said about, I think you said they have to learn how to dance, lead, and when to lead and when to follow. I love that. And Akua, what you said about transparency, which is so vital. So let's move on to our next question. This one's for you, Meenakshi. With your experience in Agile business transformation, tell us why businesses are in need of this transformation and what are they missing?
I think there's three things that come to mind, top of mind, in terms of transformation. First of all, I do want to say that Agile transformation or business process transformation has unfortunately become buzzwords. And I think that's, to me, is also part of the problem. And I think that I want to start by saying that transformation as we know it, first of all, it's not new. And second of all, it's not rocket science. I find that there's a lot of inspiration for us in nature. So if you look around at nature, the transformation is what keeps nature alive, everything in nature alive. So that realization for me has been very grounding in my own work. So to me, the three reasons I would say transformation work has become, or it's important and individuals and organizations need to pay attention to it, are number one, is the the fact that things are changing, it's not just the fact that it's changing. And I'm sure a lot of us have heard the term or this acronym called VUCA. There's a lot of talk around, oh, we are in VUCA times. VUCA has always existed. So volatility, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. These characteristics have always existed for as long as the universe has existed, to be fair. What's shifted in that is those of us that are familiar with the concepts of big data, there's this concept of 4 V's of big data. Big data is nothing but huge data sets of structured and unstructured data. And what makes it big data? The characteristics are the 4 V's: volume, variety, velocity, and veracity. And so the volume of change, the number of things that are changing, that's significantly higher than whatever we have seen in the past. And the pace at which they come at you and the velocity of change, right? And so many pieces are interconnected. And that's the second point I'll come to. And because there is so much that's happening around you, the volume and the velocity, we live in a social media age. It's hard for us to be discerning at all times about what really matters and what doesn't. That's where the veracity piece comes into play. And the fourth is the variety, the number of things that's changing. So there's volume, which is the quantum of change, and the number of things and the pace at which they're coming at you. Sometimes it feels like we are hurtling down this road that we don't know where it's leading to, right? So to me, the VUCA environment that we're in. The second thing I think organizations need to really be intentional about transformation is the interconnected world that we live in. And I think we are at the other end of experiencing globalization. When in my early years in my career, globalization was a thing. Many economies, including India, for example, opened up to the world for the first time in the mid-90s. Foreign direct investment started coming in the early 2000s. So things are changing now. And so the more we find ourselves in a globalized world, the more interconnected things are. Like we have supply chain disruptions because of war going on oceans away, right? So that's the second thing. The third thing I think is that there is an increased sense of awareness among us as individuals, and particularly in the workforce around the world. And there's a very high sense of agency at an individual level, something that we have, at least I have not seen in my career. And I think that there is overall, because everything is so technology oriented, there's a sense of democratization of most things. And I think that these are like 3 main aspects that organizations really need to pay attention to, and why transformation is a big deal. I know I said a lot, so I'm going to pause, and I would love to hear from Akua as well.
Yeah, Akua, is there anything you want to add to that, or any thoughts you have on what Meenakshi said there?
I mean, first and foremost, you've probably seen my head just bobbing. Like, I really love how you've put that together and you've shared those frameworks to help people think about this really rapidly evolving and changing world that we live in. So from my perspective, I really don't think that there's anything to add other than a lot of the trends that you're sharing are also things that I see. And I think one of the things that's been really interesting, I think one of the areas that have, or one of the places where this concept of Agile has really been adopted is within fast growing startups. So not only do we have all these amazing changes in which how we're showing up, we also have, and once again, startups have always existed. And I love how you share how a lot of these things, which we sort of are taking for granted right now, are things that have always existed. Startups have always existed, but we've just done a much better job of sort of branding them and putting them into these boxes. So just really recognizing that this is really on everyone's radar right now. So we have these ways of thinking about ourselves as individuals and what we can contribute. We have a lot of new things happening. We have definitely some new business models also coming out and new ways in which people are making money. So lots of new things, lots and lots of new things happening at the same time.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And, you know, to the point where Kylie had also asked about, okay, what are organizations missing? I would say that one is that the whole shift in attitude towards work. Again, our 8-hour work days, they all originated when we were from the industrial era, right? Because machines could be operated 24 hours a day. So we need people to run the machine. So it was all very productivity oriented. And we have kind of mindlessly adopted those same principles for knowledge work. And we are seeing now that it really doesn't work. Work has shifted from being a place to go to an activity and to a life activity. So the opportunity that we have and what some organizations are missing, I would say, is that shift in how the workforce views work. And I want to say that my scope here is knowledge work purely. Any kind of industry that uses technology as their foundational aspect. There are still industries that have, you have to go to a place to do your work. Agriculture, manufacturing, and things like that. But in the knowledge work space, I think it's about the shift that's happening is to how can you redesign work with keeping life in the center of it. So long we have designed our life around our work, but now there's a shift in that.
Such a good point, Meenakshi. Thanks for sharing to both of you. So let's see. I wanted to say, while traditional leadership, which we were just talking about a little bit, is often reactive, Agile leadership shifts that focus to creative. Agile leadership allows people to anticipate obstacles and adapt to challenges with a more open-minded approach. So Akua, you've helped and continue to help leaders through something similar, going from reactive to proactive, like you mentioned, which fits perfectly in line with Agile leadership. How do you accomplish this, and what's needed to see that shift from reactive to proactive?
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I think that there are 3 basic things that really come to mind. And when I'm supporting leaders, when I'm, giving workshops, when I'm having conversations, there's always 3 basic things that I'm sharing. The first is really the importance of cultivating your self-awareness. And that's just really recognizing that, and this is sort of some of the things that we've talked about before, right? That things are shifting, whether they're business models, where there's people's interests, and who we are also as human beings, that also evolves and shifts. So the first step is really cultivating your self-awareness around what's happening, even wanting to do something differently, I think is a huge part about being able to actually have transformation. And that can be at the individual level or even at the company level, right? At the board level. They have to be aware of this and they have to be ready for change or to challenge themselves to do something different. The second piece is really where you're sort of stepping up into experimentation. And I think that Agile really is all about, right? Experimenting, trying new things, being willing and open to shift. Another way to describe that might also be about asking yourself, how am I willing to engage? Is there a different way I can engage? So getting really curious and thinking about, is there a different way to do this? The last step, and I think that this is something where, at least with the individuals that I tend to support, is quite difficult for them to do, but I think it's equally important as we're talking about, transformation. And as we talk about going from very reactive to proactive, is expectations. And really just recognizing that our expectations, of course, can shift, can evolve, can change, but we do need to take some time to think about what success could look like, whether it's for ourselves or for others or for the organization, and then make sure it's time bound. So we actually will come back to it and update it based on new awarenesses that we've been able to glean and new ways of engaging, but recognizing that it's a constant cycle of updating and iterating and trying, but that can only happen if you're cultivating your self-awareness, really experimenting and thinking about how do I want to engage, and then giving yourself some sort of time-bound expectation, goal, or vision that you can revisit time over time. And I think through that sort of structure, that's really where you're going to start to see what works, what doesn't work, what can I potentially do differently moving forward at any level, whether you're an individual or you're a company. And this is one of the things I always love to share, especially when we start with something as simple as your schedule. Right? So many people, right? If we're thinking something that simple, like, I'm spending my time doing this, but are you really cultivate your awareness around what's happening, collect that data, if that makes sense for you and that resonates, then think about how can I show up differently? What can I experiment with? And then when do I need to check in to make sure I'm actually on the right page?
Wow, great answer, Akua. Thank you. And Meenakshi, anything you want to add to that before we move on to the next question?
I definitely love the self-awareness piece. That with self, I think, is cannot be overemphasized, I would say, especially in the context of agile leadership. And I think that there's a huge opportunity for us to start there before we think about our ecosystems and how else we bring value to those around us. Yeah.
Great, thanks. Okay, so moving on, I wanted to mention also that McKinsey research states 3 important transformations that I think can help us truly understand what an agile leader looks like or would look like in comparison to traditional leadership styles we see. So the first one they mention is from certainty to discovery, learning to value innovation, which we've mentioned, from authority to partnership, fostering collaboration, from scarcity to abundance, fostering value creation, focusing on opportunity and abundance and ways to achieve it rather than on what's lacking. I'd like to ask you both what you think of this overview of agility in leadership. Is there something you would add that we haven't already mentioned? And this could be for both of you, so whoever wants to, maybe Akua, if you want to go first.
I mean, the first thing that really just came to mind when we talk about sort of these shifts that are happening is just the importance, I think, at the end of the day of mindset. And that's why cultivating your self-awareness can be so key. Just looking at something from a different direction or different perspective can bring out so many new ideas, so many new opportunities, can make you feel even better about yourself. So when a member of your team comes your way, you're so much more excited to really engage with them. So nothing more to add, but the only thing I would suggest in relation to thinking about these pieces is it really starts with your mindset and how you're really just looking at that issue, that challenge, and shifting it to thinking about it as an opportunity can really help to create that agile, environment.
Definitely. And Meenakshi?
Yeah, I agree. And the couple of points that you called out in the McKinsey research really resonated with me. One is around abundance, and the other piece around the need for collaboration. That's also a big shift in terms of how traditional leadership and agile leadership really work. The concept of lead from anywhere, and that, I think, as a leader, it's so important to be open to the fact that what we call as leadership can come from anywhere within the organization. And how willing am I as an individual, one, to really see that, and two, to acknowledge that and do something with it and empower the other individual to really action that out. I think those are the pieces that really stood out for me to share.
Great, thanks, Meenakshi. These transformations that we just mentioned from the research are key, but in agile leadership, we see a lot of collaboration, adaptability, and structural changes. So Meenakshi, I want to ask you, how can a leader be agile while also setting and managing healthy boundaries?
That's a good one. That one made me think. And I think that I know that in the software development and product development world, a lot of times there is misconception that because it's agile means sort of anything goes, and that you really don't have to have a plan. And none of this is true. So I want to suggest that there are, in my experience and also working with my clients in helping them through this, I would say there's like 4 or 5 things that really stand out. 5 things I would say that stand out for me, or I would say those are some strategies that individuals can use to set boundaries. Number 1 is understanding and establishing rules of engagement with your stakeholders and with your team. What does that mean? So first of all, a lot of us, it's not uncommon for us to work in geographically distributed teams, which means you're in different time zones. What are our communication norms? What is our team charter? Really understanding that. It sounds very basic, but a lot of times we take it for granted because we assume and not ask enough questions. So we just carry on with what we think is the right way to proceed. So setting really clear rules of engagement. And I also want to call out that these rules of engagement are they're like a living, breathing document, if you will. So just because someone agreed on something, you can't take it for granted forever. Make sure you check in. Yeah. And the second thing I mentioned already is about really coming from a place of curiosity. Don't make assumptions, ask. So what does that mean? Asking how people, what are their ways of working? How do they collaborate? How do they ask for help? What drives them? What brings them down? What is their motivation to work? The third thing is something that I alluded to earlier on is being open to the idea that leadership is independent of titles and positional power, that it can come from anywhere. And it's incumbent on each of us to be intentional about being, to be willing to succeed. Because we have certain expectations of what leadership looks like and who can and cannot be a leader, right? So setting aside, checking our own biases around that. So expecting that leadership can come from anywhere. The fourth thing is, and by the way, I'm just calling them out as 1, 2, 3, 4, not in order of importance, in order of how it came to me. The fourth thing is really being focused on integrity. Your say-do gap has to be as close to zero as possible. And especially in a virtual world, I think when people do not have the opportunity to spend time in person, it's all the more important that if and when we do meet, that you actually come across as the same person that you show up in your pixel. So that, and the last thing is acknowledging everyone's humanity. And I think that's something that's missing a lot these days, especially as we become more technology oriented. What I mean by that is, because we are all human, we're all bound to make mistakes, and we're all bound to do things differently at different points in time because we're not robots. So giving everyone the benefit of the doubt and checking in, and not just making stories about individuals during our interactions, but really checking in with them. So I would say those are the 5 key things around setting boundaries.
Really nice. Thanks, Meenakshi. And Akua, anything you would like to add to that?
I mean, just well said. I really love how you put that together. And I think that last point that you mentioned around the fact that we are human beings is something that I love to remind myself and others about. Simply because, especially now that some of us might be working from home, some places might be in hybrid environments, we actually sometimes overwork from home because we tell ourselves, hey, like, I'm not in the office, like, I have to work a certain amount, or it's just easier to have access to your laptop and get things done. So really just recognizing that a lot of it is reminding ourselves that we're human, and being, just being willing to have some of those conversations where we are sharing what we need in order to be successful so that everyone can win at the end of the day, right? It's not selfish, right? So sometimes we do need to normalize the fact that we're human, which I think is always interesting, but it's not selfish to recognize and to communicate you're not a robot.
Definitely. Thanks to you both. So moving forward, Akua, the next question is for you. Some people in organizations as a whole may be opposed to change. Maybe they're comfortable or even scared. How can there be leadership transformation on an organizational level? And have you seen it happen before?
Yeah, definitely. It definitely can happen at the organizational level. And I would say that sometimes it does take hitting a brick wall for change to happen. That's not what I like to see. Of course, that's not what I would ever suggest or advocate, but it does sometimes take a really negative tweet or terrible press or an outsider, making an accusation in order for things to sometimes change within an organization. But that is not what we want to have happen in order for change to really come through and for people really to really sort of step into doing something different. I think that at the organizational level, it's really important And it's really dependent, of course, right, at the size of the organization as well. But this is really what an executive team should be very focused on, right? Having a pulse on how people feel within the organization, making sure that there are feedback loops. If we want to go even higher, if you're an organization that actually does have a board, the board should be involved in this, have an idea once again of how people feel within the organization. And they should be the ones actually pushing it. If you work within a very structured environment or an organization that's been around for a while, it's really the people on the board that should be pushing this through the executives. And of course, it should filter down to middle managers and any, additional employee. Within, maybe more fast growing startups, it might look a little bit different in terms of maybe who's pushing or who has the levers, but really at the end of the day, it should come from creating some sort of feedback loops, creating opportunities for individuals to build their own awareness and maybe even share that with others. So I feel like I've shared a lot of different pieces here, but it looks very different for every single organization. It's also, of course, going to be informed by that organization's mission, their values. And I think that it's always really important. And when I have these conversations with founders, because I work mostly with founders at fast growing startups, I always tell them to lead with their values first. So I always will ask them, like, what are the values of your organization? And it's important when you have these difficult and sometimes scary conversations, if you do feel comfortable being vulnerable and sharing, like, hey, this is a difficult and scary conversation, but it's something that we need to have in relation to whatever the organization's values are and mission and the vision they're looking to set for themselves. So really just recognizing that most organizations have these pieces, but they're not always walking their talk. So always taking a step back once again and getting curious and building your awareness of around, as an organization, how are we showing up in relation to some of these things that we've set for ourselves can also be a great way for organizations to take that step forward without having to hit that brick wall. Hopefully not hitting that brick wall. They can do it for themselves internally, hopefully.
Love that. Thanks so much, Akua, for that. And Meenakshi, anything you want to add to that before we get to the next one?
Yeah, I loved the point that you made, Akua, about leading with your values. That really resonated with me. And I think that values act as such a great guardrail and a decision-making tool, really, sometimes, especially when we find ourselves in caught in hot places. The only other thing I would add around change is, and as you were speaking about this, Akua, the point you made about the brick wall, the negative tweet, that really kind of stayed with me. And then there are so many changes and transformations that have been kickstarted by something like that, right? What that brought up for me is that how amazing it would be if all of us as individuals and organizations treated change just like another operational activity, right? We need to normalize change because everything changes, people change, situations change. So instead of making it a thing out there, if we really made it as part of our routine, that's what came up for me when you said that.
Yeah. So maybe even one of their values, right? Recognizing that we evolve, the organization is going to evolve, it's going to shift and change.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
definitely. All right. So Meenakshi, the next question is for you. With all the technological and social shifts we see, there are many resources and models for big organizations, but for small and medium-sized businesses, what frameworks and resources can be incorporated to ensure agility so that they're not struggling during fast growth later on?
Yeah. Thank you for asking such a bias for action oriented question. That's what I like about this question. I think that, I work primarily with mid-career professionals and leaders and also small and medium businesses in their transformation journeys. And three things have really sort of, that I offer to my clients and that have worked well. One is, in terms of a framework, I would say your typical quality improvement framework of PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, as cliche as it can sound, it's so valuable. And if you look at the Agile Manifesto, one of the things that the 4 basic principles that it talks about, individuals and interactions over people and process. That's the first one. And then it talks about the importance of responding to change over the need to follow a plan. And there's two other principles that really talk about progress over perfection. Those are the pieces that it focuses on. I think that frameworks such as PDCA, Plan, Do, Check, Act, or OODA, which is Observe, Orient, Decide, Act, pretty much aligned. Creating the space and time needed to really implement these frameworks, I think that's important, which means that you're really focused on what is the minimum viable product that you're looking to create, what is the MVP that you're looking to create. So instead of taking a big bang approach, if we can really start focusing on what is that one thing that I as an individual leader or we as an organization can do that will lead us closer to whatever our mission is and in line with our values. If we start thinking about it, we are really able to sort of break down whatever that big vision may be, the big, hairy, audacious goals, whatever they may be, and really break it down into chunks from which we can learn. So you're really controlling your blast radius in a way, right? And then you iterate, inspect and adapt, and you build on delivering incremental value. So from a framework standpoint, I would say the OODA and the PDCA frameworks are really useful. From an individual standpoint, as a leader, I would say start with self, like Akua said, and then build on that. So to me, leadership really, and particularly Agile leadership, is like it's a 3-step process, and they're all building blocks. So you start with self, leading self, then you focus on leading others, and then you focus on leading change, because creating that self-awareness and how you feel about all these things that you're asking others to do, that's very important. And then understanding the impact of what you say and how you say it and what you do, your impact of your actions and words on others, and what are their needs, understanding that in collaboration is what is going to help you be successful in leading change. So that would be, for an individual, I would say leading self, leading others, and leading change. And lastly, 5 areas in which I think leaders should really focus on. I call them the 5 C's: create, connect, cultivate, collaborate, and communicate. So how do you create? There's pretty self-explanatory, but I think it's a sequence. So again, starting with self, and then how you're properly getting your ideas, and how you're connecting ideas with people, and in the end, how are you communicating the why and the what and the how of the change? So those would be the 3 aspects that I would like to share.
Great, Meenakshi. I think you're the queen of acronyms.
I love
and
it.
Sorry, I don't know why the light was flickering, but no, it's impressive. I wish I had that knowledge of knowing all these acronyms and remembering. That's really, I need to get a spreadsheet from you. But thanks so much, Meenakshi, for your great insight. When we think about the future and things like the importance of analytics, being data-driven, and technology, Agile leadership seems like a no-brainer. So Akua, how can leaders use those aspects to their advantage when trying to be Agile?
Yeah, I think that once again, this is such an important conversation for us to have right now, where we have access to more information than we've ever had. And we've been collecting all sorts of all types of information. And I am not a data expert, but I just so happen to have a sister who actually has a PhD in qualitative and quantitative methods. And one of the conversations that we tend to have over and over again is really just the importance of what is your intention at the end of the day when you are collecting information, when you are collecting data. And, I think a lot of people feel that data is, what would the right word be, that data is inherently not biased, but the reality is why you decided to collect in the first place automatically makes it biased. So really just recognizing that data can be incredibly helpful when making certain decisions in certain parts of your business. But when it comes to other places, specifically, I'm thinking mostly around people, it's really important that we get really curious about why are we doing this? What is the intention? And what are we hoping to leverage this data for into the future? Because really just recognizing we can actually be perpetuating prejudices, we can be perpetuating biases in certain parts of our business if we're not really careful about what we're doing and the purpose that we're using this data for. So I am, once again, all for data. I think that it can be incredibly helpful, but it's really going to look very different for each part of the business and different departments. Quick example, it's a lot easier probably to be somewhat data-driven if you're a software engineer, if you're, within architecture, that sort of stuff. In other departments, it might be a little bit harder. And if anything, I've seen it being used really, I think, inhumanely in other parts of businesses. For example, something like, which just comes to mind, even thinking about my own time when I was working within a fast-growing startup within marketing, where, you're trying to keep track of the number of calls people are making and sort of coming to conclusions about, based on the number of calls you've created or been able to generate, what that means for who you are as a marketer. And I mean, you can go on and on about it, but that's not the same as, completing a certain amount of code within a period of time. So really just recognizing that data will play a huge role in how we move forward, but it's also very important for those of us that have the power, that are leaders, that we are thinking very critically and very intentionally about how we're using it and how we communicate the insights that we glean or we gather from it, right? So you can gather information and make a decision about a team and say this team is not doing a good job, but you might not be getting the full picture. So there's a lot of nuance that needs to go on with how we leverage data, but I do think it can be very helpful with generating potentially better decisions moving forward.
Yeah, that was such a great answer, Akua. Thanks so much. Meenakshi, anything to add?
It was very insightful, Akua, what you pointed out about how bias can creep in, and in data collection, like the reason for the data collection itself can be rooted in bias, and that was very insightful. Thank you for calling that out. And it really, to me, what I took away from what you shared is the story behind the numbers are as important as the numbers, or as important as the data. So
if anything, there should be a narrative alongside, if possible.
Absolutely.
Great, thank you both. So where were we? Let's see. So Akua, let's see, yeah. We have been seeing a huge shift with remote and hybrid work. How does that impact Agile leadership? And does it make it more challenging to adopt an Agile leadership style?
I think that if anything, this is the perfect opportunity to apply Agile concepts, because I think Agile is all about being efficient and productive and really about being able to adapt to whatever situation that you're in. And so as we move forward and we see these different combinations of how people are going to work together, whether it's even fully remote, and then maybe there are times where you come together for collaboration sessions in person, or there's sort of a hybrid where you see people in and out, it becomes increasingly important for us to think very creatively about how we can make sure that we're incorporating everyone and that we're getting everyone to put their best foot forward. So just some quick thoughts that come to mind when thinking about leveraging Agile, just being able to consider maybe people who won't be able to come into the office and what that might mean for decision-making, what that might mean for whether or not their voice is actually truly being heard. Because I do think there is going to be a difference if certain people are able to come into the office and have a conversation or make decisions versus maybe that person who can't, because they're just not physically capable of doing it, or they're not physically in the area. So it's through Agile leadership where I think, companies are going to be able to create, or at least highlight policies around making sure that we're keeping everyone on the same page, that everyone is getting the same information. And in terms of decision-making, there are some thoughts around how this can impact decision-making moving forward.
Great, thanks. And Meenakshi?
Totally agree with Akua. Proximity bias is such a big issue at the moment, and leaders recognizing that and working around that. I know one of the clients that I'm supporting, they started realizing that. And one of the things that the team came up with when they started going back, doing hybrid work is, I need to really shift my meeting days to be not the day that I'm in the office, because there's so much of collaborative work that I can do that there's no point in me being in the office and still being stuck in a conference room attending meetings. So allowing grassroots level decision making in how people want to utilize the time, and how they want to collaborate, when they want to collaborate, and when it is best for them to do that. Really letting teams be that self-organized, self-directed teams. I think that's the big opportunity that we have.
Great. And to finish this off, I have a question for both of you. And I first wanted to say thank you so much for your great insight. And before we get to the Q&A session, I have, like I said, a question for both. You both have worked in different parts of the world and you have so much experience. So have you seen a big difference in leadership styles and trends during your professional career, depending on where you were working? And if so, what can different work cultures around the world learn from each other?
Such a good question. That's such a good question. I mean, even I think between, when I first started working, I'm going to date myself here, but I started working in 2012. So even between 2012 and 2020, even between 2020 and 2022, I think there's been a massive shift in how people show up and even what they can demand and the expectations that they can have. Because I do think that there's been a massive shift in where, and I put this in quotes, but where the power lies. One of the things that I've seen that's been really interesting, specifically in the markets that I'm physically in right now. So most of my work has been between Ghana and Nigeria, and I've spent a bit of time in Southern Africa and then East Africa. And I think some of these trends might be quite, they might be similar to what's happening down there as well. But one of the things I see that's been very interesting in this part of the world is the fact that the internet has really opened up opportunities for so many people. And so the thought of having to accept something just because this is where I am physically is really no longer a barrier, because there are so many more opportunities online, and places and people and organizations in different countries are now open to working with people where I now live. And I think that that means that organizations here and companies here are really having to think very hard about how they're engaging with their employees, how they're acknowledging their employees, how they're recognizing them or not, because they have to compete with companies around the world. And from my perspective, it's amazing. And I am all for it. I think it's great. I think it's really going to force a lot of outdated approaches to work, to showing up, to expectations to honestly crumble. And it's going to be, I think, absolutely amazing overall for economies here. I think it's going to have a massive impact on how companies show up, how they approach innovation, hopefully how they start to accept more agile ways of showing up, and, and potentially, I mean, I don't know if this is the right word to use, but potentially democratize how they think about, bringing on employees, onboarding them, the whole thing. I think all of it companies will really have to take a hard look at themselves and shift a lot of things that they've been able to get away with. And just simply because the internet at the end of the day, and faster internet and stronger internet and things like that. So I think it's been really exciting to see. And I'm all for it.
Thanks so much, Akua. That's a really interesting answer. And I love that. It was really insightful. And Meenakshi, what about you? Now I even forgot the question because I was
I'm not sure if I answered the question, honestly.
No, but
I just got so excited.
I think you did. I loved it. And Meenakshi, anything you want? Well, of course, give me your answer on what you think in your experience working in different countries, and maybe what leadership styles, or I think the question was, how can those different leadership styles learn from each other, or what do you think?
Yeah. So first of all, Akua, talk about dating yourself. All right. So I'm really going to do a good job here. So I've been part of the professional workforce since the late 90s. And I will say that, my first, 10, 12 years were in India, and then the rest of it has been in the US, and primarily in the technology space, and talent management, talent development space, people development space. What I'm seeing, in addition to a couple of things that I called out earlier, the concept of lead from anywhere. So I totally agree with you, Akua, on the point you made about democratization. I think it's happening in different spheres of the world and business and all of it. So something that I've been reading on LinkedIn, and I know it's true because I still keep in touch with a lot of friends and family in India. So same thing is happening in India in terms of technology, in terms of the internet boom, if you will. So India is among I think India has one of the cheapest mobile data plans in the world. So access to technology is just a mobile phone away, which did not used to be the case until 10, 15 years ago. So now you can, for example, you can buy something at a street cart, and you can pay using Google Pay. So they all have their QR code printed and put up in front of their little stalls. Unimaginable even 5 years ago, but that's what technology has done. So, some of the ways in which I think our world has changed and our lives have changed is there's an increased use of technology. So technology itself, earlier on, it used to be the use of technology was limited to certain areas of our lives and to certain strata of society in a way, from a socioeconomic standpoint. I think now it's breaking barriers, which is fantastic. And it's allowing for development to really happen in places where it's most needed, rather than a set of people deciding where it would happen. It's just happening, and that's fantastic. The other thing I'm seeing is, and this I think goes back to the lead from anywhere point I was making earlier. The other thing is there's an increased focus on diversity, equity, inclusion thought processes. When I first started in my career, that wasn't even a thing. And I know that even in the US, it's picking up steam now, but I think that it's a topic that's on organizations' minds, on leaders' minds, with the same level of intensity around the world. Now, diversity issues are going to look different in different parts of the world. Like race is a big thing in the US, whereas it's not race, it's religion and caste that's a big thing in India, along with gender. So there are differences, but then the focus is there. And that to me is a big change that I've seen in my career. The third piece is really, there's an increase in gig work and remote work. Mm-hmm. So it's not uncommon for individuals to have more than one job or do more than one thing. When I first started out in my career, that was unheard of. If you had a full-time job, that's all you did. And I find myself being pretty old-fashioned when it comes to those decisions, when I have to make those decisions. So I'm seeing that shift in my own lifetime, in my own professional lifetime, that now it is about making the most of opportunities that come your way. It's about diversifying your source of income as an individual. It's also about, like Akua, you were saying, physical boundaries don't mean anything anymore, thanks to technology, thanks to the power of the internet. And people are really embracing that, regardless of what socioeconomic background they come from. And it is in the knowledge workspace, it is evident in the type of new roles coming up: head of remote work, head of future of work, internal coaching, head of coaching. These are roles that are coming up within organizations. So I think those are the big shifts that I've seen in the last 20, 25 years, and more so in the last 5 to 6 years.
Thanks, Meenakshi. And I think it's so true. We can see here where all three of us are in different countries, different places. And so we know that physical location doesn't mean anything. We can connect, and it's amazing. So I'm going to invite now anyone who wants to ask a question, any of the attendees, feel free to send your questions here in the chat. We'll get started with the Q&A. It's already 6:55, here we have 5 more minutes. So I invite everyone to ask their questions. I did have my own question, Meenakshi, for you to get the ball rolling on that. So you mentioned the dance thing at the beginning where you said you need to learn how to follow and lead. What advice would you give to individuals who maybe, let's say, individuals with managers or a leader on their team that doesn't know how to find that balance? Like maybe their leader is leading too much or not allowing them to give input, or vice versa. What advice would you give to them to maybe approach that person and figure out a system?
Have a conversation. I think a lot of us still tend to be a little bit passive in our careers. Something I learned from one of my mentors is manage your career like you would manage your business. And just taking that approach shifts everything. It shifted everything for me. At the workplace, I used to wait to be recognized. I used to wait to be given opportunities. And that I learned very quickly that unless I take charge of my career, I owe it to myself to be my own advocate. I'm the most important person I'll ever lead, and I am my best spokesperson. So I would say those two mottos, if you will, adopting that will make that shift. Having a clear conversation around what it is, how that leader's actions and behaviors are affecting me, and what it is doing to me as an individual, having a clear-cut conversation on that. It is very hard to do. It is very hard to even set that meeting up, let alone having that conversation. Practice it with someone that in your circle. Practice it a few times, but then do have that conversation. That's to me is the first step.
Definitely, conversation or communication is key, really. And Akua, one question for you. You have a lot of experience working with startups, and sometimes maybe people imagine that startups, the leadership is hard to determine and to find, just because everyone's learning at the same time. Things are changing so fast. So for you as a professional, what have you learned working in startups to be a good leader?
Yeah, I would say the first really is embracing the fact that things are constantly going to change. So a lot of it is being willing to communicate to yourself and to others that, hey, like, I don't know everything. It's okay. But we're going to figure this out together. So part of it is being very vulnerable, but then also being very honest with yourself and honest with the people that you surround yourself with. So when I think back to when I was first starting within a fast growing startup and my job was to hire other people, a part of it is also recognizing that when you are recruiting, it's really important to communicate that, hey, this is a risk. So that you are able to attract the right types of people that are willing to go on this roller coaster of a ride with you. And as you have that onboarding process, right, really recognizing that a lot of it is around setting those expectations appropriately. I'm not suggesting you scare anyone, that's not it, but it is about being very honest about the fact that we are trying these things out. So I think that's the first bit. And that might be more around sort of that setting expectation piece. I also think a part of it is recognizing that even if you don't know everything, that doesn't mean that you can't create a process or have a system to update what those expectations could be. So when I reflect back on my time working once again within a fast growing startup, I used to have at this time Google Docs and Google Sheets, luckily, was already invented. We were using them. I think those are really great tools. And what that does create is some level of transparency. So what you could do, and this is what I would do, is when I'd have my one-on-ones, we would set expectations when I first started almost on a weekly basis. These are my expectations for you within this time-bound period. All right. And then we get to a point where, hey, this is working. So we can now set expectations maybe per month. And then you get to another point where you could actually start setting expectations at a quarter. So a part of it also might be just recognizing that you can set expectations for even as short as, I want to spend 10 minutes on this. And this is actually what I do with my clients, because a lot of expectation setting and a lot of leadership is around having confidence in the fact that you're going to achieve something within a period of time. As human beings, naturally, we're really bad at planning. Naturally, we have this bias to underestimate certain bits and overestimate other parts, but you can get a lot better at it by sort of setting these smaller promises. And I do consider goal setting, vision setting, a part of it is sort of this promise to yourself or a promise to somebody else or a promise that you make together with a member of your team. And so you can do that and then leverage a tool like a Google Doc or Google Sheets to keep track of it, but constantly be checking in. So everyone's on the same page, but you can set that that time period, right? That cadence can of course evolve and shift as the business evolves and shifts as well. So two basic pieces. One, being honest with yourself, being honest with others, communicating it, having the conversations. And then the second bit around setting those expectations, having them written down somewhere, and then updating them as you go.
Great, thanks so much, Akua. So thank you to you both, and it was a pleasure to hear your insights. I'm going to let everyone know that this session has been recorded. So later this week, the recording will be sent out to the attendees if you missed part of the session. And also I'll send along the any contact info that Akua and Meenakshi want to share, so that if you have any other questions, you can feel free to reach out to them via LinkedIn. So thank you so much to Meenakshi and Akua for being here today. It was such a pleasure. And it was really nice to hear your perspective and your insight.
Well, thank you. Thank you so much for having me. This was an absolute pleasure on my part as well. Just thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you, Kylie and Factorial HR for doing this. And it was such a pleasure to hang out with you and all the attendees. Thank you, everyone, for your time.
Likewise. Thanks, Meenakshi. Thanks, Akua. And thanks, everyone, for attending. Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye.
Bye.